だがまあ、多少は楽しめたぞ。人間、術師、呪霊。1000年前やった中ではマシな方だった。誇れ。お前は強い。
With the sheer amount of videos and think pieces and content out there available on him, I'm not sure that there's anything about Ryomen Sukuna that I can shed light on that hasn't been said before. This man has grabbed audiences by the scruff of their necks and shocked and awed with his sheer presence, aura, dynamics, and deceptive complexities, and as a result, he has left so many feeling reflective, doing their best to parse out his nuances and meaning. And I think that's amazing and a testament to the power that this character has, and I can't help but try to throw my hat in the ring to an extent. Not to necessarily presume that there's anything about him that only I have thought of, but to simply share why he's one of my favorite antagonists ever and why he appeals to me. Now, for years I liked Sukuna and thought he was good, but I felt like there was a buffer there and I never connected with him or found him as super impressive as others seemed to. But something clicked with me during the airing of Season 2 of the anime adaptation. Maybe it was Suabe's performance, or the magnificent presentation, or simply being refreshed on the story content of Shibuya, but whatever the reason may have been, I suddenly found myself enthralled with the character in a way that I had never been before and that only reinforced itself with the material that would come in the manga's finale and climax. And what I've come to learn is clear. I love Sukuna for his unbelievable presence and rawness. I love what he means for the setting at large. I love his dynamics with Yuji and Gojo, and I love his intricacies and complexities. But most of all, what really strikes me about Sukuna is his simplicity. He gesticulates and taunts and mocks. He is cruel and sadistic and enjoys suffering, so he's by no means a withdrawn, honorable knight of pure principle, but at his heart is a profound respect for the concept of strength and might with no bells or whistles. There really isn't any trace of fraudery or a mask or any notion of coping for 99.9% of his time throughout the story. He simply holds true to the philosophy that he's built through experience, he says what he means, and he expresses how he feels. That isn't to say that the things that he does are not tainted with evil, but from a characterization and psychology perspective, Sukuna is honest, acting in accord with how he's learned that the world works and how he's lived his life. Born and yet not yet born into the womb of his starving mother attached to a twin, Sukuna's first feelings were twofold. Fear of the void of death that would await should he himself starve to death, and a rampant conviction and desire to do whatever it took to survive. As a result, Sukuna ate his twin, ensuring that not only would he live on, but that he would do so as an individual, not tied to his twin or treated as the same being, and not dependent on one another as he would have been if they both survived. From literally before he was born, Sukuna desired to live as himself and expressed this yearning through a Darwinistic strength, and from here he continued to be destructive and isolated. He killed his parents as a byproduct of his power, he was abused and scorned as an abomination, and essentially, he was lonely. This never bothered him, and he never consciously noted any loneliness until he realized it after his life was done. But all this served to do was further embed his ideals. The idea that connection and bonds were unnecessary, that strength was all that mattered, that ideals and hopes and dreams outside of it were meaningless sentiment that he could genuinely see no value in. He continued to isolate himself. He built himself up as the disgraced one infamous for killing countless sorcerers, and as the death-avoiding, life-loving fiend that he is, he collaborated with Kenjaku to live on after his death through imbuing his soul into 20 fingers as cursed objects, where their power would fester. And that leads us up to his rebirth through Yuji, in the beginning of the story. What I find most potent about Sukuna here is the incredibly organic way that he came to view the world the way he did, why he saw no need to connect with others, why he took so much pleasure in destruction and pain as he defeated others. Because from birth, he has seen the rules that the world has imposed and rejected them. enforcing his own rule upon it instead through strength and death. To him, might made right, terror meant gratification and individuality, and there was never anything that tempted him to think that anything in life was worthwhile. And in terms of this philosophy, he was never once proven wrong as the world ceded to him. Sukuna conflates his way of seeing the world with his ability to defeat all. They are one and the same. And so if someone were to defeat him while imploring that his way of thinking was misled, it would have encouraged him to see things differently. But that never happened. He was undefeated, and so of course he became this way and never changed his mindset. He never had any reason to do so. Sukuna was often very mocking and arrogant in general, but he was never overly conceited in his philosophy. He had just never been made to think or been tempted to see things in another way because no one had proven him wrong with power. It's not that he refused to listen, it's that he genuinely tried and couldn't see the beauty in the things that he antithesized that others did because he had never needed them to be successful and because he only took heed of those he could conceptualize as worthy. Essentially, because of the way that he viewed worth, he would only consider the opinions of those who proved themselves to be on his level or at least notably impressive. And even then, he probably wouldn't change his mind unless he was defeated. Because what's the need to do so when your only barometer for worth is power and you never lose? No need to fix what isn't broken. Sukuna views humans as vastly inferior and freely speaks about how he simply does not understand them. Interestingly enough, not through lack of trying. But he just doesn't understand why they don't simply submit themselves to death due to their weaknesses and why they fight in futility to survive. Which is ironic, as that tendency that he criticizes is actually very similar to the one that he showed in the womb that allowed him to transcend. Yet he doesn't understand worth in a life that's seemingly insignificant by his standards. He doesn't comprehend how such frail creatures can yearn for happiness, and he simply dismisses human emotions as tangibly worthless as a result, as well as the notion of worth attributed to relationships, bonds, and love, considering himself to be above all of it. But while he is completely secure in his feelings of superiority, royalty, and greatness, the rare times where a wrinkle of insecurity seeps through are when he is confronted with this very humanity, with others trying to reach out to him, trying to pity him. And the reason Sukuna has come to be this way does not at all imply a mutual exclusivity between nature and environment. In fact, it is due entirely to both. The reason he acted this way in the first place was due to his nature, and his environment reinforced and encouraged it and made it so that he had no reason to think against his nature. It all leads to the same thing, as he admits in his final talk with Mahito. But while Sukuna found himself unable to see other perspectives and as such, unwilling to see value in them, he was incredibly capable of valuing and appreciating those who met him on his level. After a cataclysmic bout with Jogo, he expresses a truly honest, immense respect for his combatant's strength and arouses a profound outpouring of emotion from him before he passes on. And after defeating Gojo, he is overcome by the beautiful challenge that the battle was and deems it to be an experience of sheer, unforgettable magnificence. Sukuna will taunt and mock and torture and express ecstasy and suffering, but he understands and appreciates those rare few who display a strength and skill that requires an honest effort from himself, and he will always respect that, because it's the only way that he can conceive worth in this world. It's not that he sees nothing worth respecting, it's that due to the way that he lived his life and due to the person that he is, he was incapable of seeing any value outside of this. Sukuna is a complete glutton for combat and battle and appreciates those who speak his language in this regard, and he has no clear dreams or wishes or goals beyond that and fails to see the value in such sentiments. He was always clear-sighted, rarely ever coped or blustered, and despite his pride, ego, and arrogance, everything that he said he genuinely did so because he felt that it was substantiated with good reason. Until he met Yuji Itadori. Sharing a body with this boy who antithesized every fiber of his being had a profound, deeply rooted, and significantly altering impact on Sukuna. Yuji represents, expresses, and stands for a lack of ego, a lack of strength in the way that Sukuna defines it, a compassion and empathy, and such an unbelievable valuing of bonds, a way to fight against the precedent of the world that Sukuna set. And Sukuna's every instinct looks at this and immediately wants to dismiss it, as he has done for generations. But he finds that despite his constant attempts to do so, despite how much he slams Yuji's face into the dirt and makes him suffer through killing his loved ones and using his own body to level cities, he still finds that Yuji stubbornly persists. He just cannot shake him. Try as he might, he just cannot ignore how Yuji insists on proving him wrong. But rather than simply ignoring this and dismissing it like he would for the average lowly human, Sukuna is instead filled with an overwhelming anger and rancor in spite of how he may at times seem to play it off as if Yuji does not bother him. And when we get to a point in which Sukuna is more on the ropes, more at risk of genuinely losing than he's ever been, that hatred only grows and he restates his complete inability to understand Yuji's sentiments. And yet, that inability is not a disinterest. Because once the dust had settled, and once he had been defeated, after all was said and done, and he lingered in the void with the most outward manifestation of mankind's evil in Mahito for company, he was able to take a breath, reflect, accept his loss, and realize right at the end that maybe he wasn't correct. He's much more reflective and contemplative here, removed from the heat of battle and its lingering consequences, as he ponders that maybe there were other ways that he could have lived his life that may have led to a fulfillment that he thought not possible. And the reason for that is so entirely, beautifully simple. Because he lost. His language for interacting with the world was victory or defeat, strength or weakness, and he was always capable of adapting and changing his way of thinking if he had been given reason to. It's just that the only way that he would have viewed a decent reason to do so would be losing against someone that desired to prove him wrong. And he didn't lose that way until right at the end to Yuji. And everyone else, but primarily to Yuji. While Gojo implored Sukuna wordlessly to realize that his path was one of agonizing loneliness, he never properly saw that until reflecting on his defeat, where he realized that his entire existence was formed around the idea of fear. Fearing the void, fearing others, fearing being consumed, and rising above it with strength while never seeing a path requiring connection. He decides that if he were to be given a second chance, maybe trying to live by valuing relationships and connection and not overvaluing the idea of power would be a viable way forward. And when questioned about why, it's simple, because once again, he lost. He thinks the way he does because he was literally in the womb, forced to act this way to survive. It's all that he's needed to believe in. It's everything that he's known, and literally everything that he's experienced since then has only reinforced that idea because this world is just that broken and has been forever. That is why he is fundamentally unable to conceptualize needing the things that humans need. Because they serve no purpose and are dismissed in this world, and as such, he has never been in a psychological frame of mind wherein he's seen any value there. This world is so cruel that it has never given any evidence for the idea that there is value in things outside of power for Sukuna. But there is, and that's why Yuji breaking through to him through communication via defeat is so essential. Talking didn't work, debating didn't work, reaching out to his emotions didn't work, only fighting. In the end, because Sukuna had dictated the language of the world, Yuji had to learn to speak it. And he did. And once he did, Sukuna understood, and perhaps the world was changed by that. He lost, so he was wrong. The acceptance here, the way he shifted his views, the way he realized that he could try a different path where he reached his hand out to others, when looking at the entirety of his character and why he was so refusing of shifting his stance prior to this, it all makes sense, and it's so beautifully simple as to how his entire worldview changes here. And it was a monumental task that Yuji and everyone else sacrificed life and limb to get to, but it is entirely consistent with who Sukuna was, and it was the only way to get him to understand. through full-blooded classic battle shonen. With Yuji, he experienced a genuine lack of confidence and a substantial insecurity for likely the first time in his extensive history. Yuji was the first person to make him rethink his philosophy, a nagging, weak, persistent cockroach in the back of his mind insisting upon the idea that maybe he was wrong. But deep down, Sukuna knew that something about this boy could signal his downfall, and that meant that he coped for the first time. He lied about his confidence and grew genuinely rattled. He said he wasn't fazed by him and found him pathetic, but it was because of that pathetic nature combined with the fact that a little nagging voice in the back of his mind felt like Yuji might be correct that made him feel, for probably the first time ever, genuinely lacking in confidence about his views. As I said, Gojo wanted to break this through to him as well, but Gojo lost. So this was the only chance, the only moment. And once Sukuna was defeated, in the darkness there was serenity, calmness, clarity, acceptance. He didn't view the world the way he did because of anything other than the fact that it was what he had experienced was right. But as was implied throughout the entire story, once he had been shown proof that he was wrong, he wouldn't be irrational and he wouldn't hide from his defeat, just as he showed respect when others lost to him. Because of the way he lived, strength was his philosophy, and so to defeat him ideologically, he had to be defeated physically. It just never happened, so he never thought that he was wrong, but once it did, he followed through. With a simple acceptance and a strange humility, wondering how his life would have gone if he took a different path. This simplicity and depth is what I love most about Sukuna, though the incredible complexities and dynamics, meta-elements, raw shonen hype, and awesome aura help too. At heart, he is simply a being who only learned how to live his life in one specific way and who only ever learned that that way was the only way, and as a result devalued everything in existence that was peripheral to that. Love, family, bonds, connections, sentiment in general. These are things that Sukuna shrugged off as meaningless and void, but this is all that Yuji used to empower himself in a world that laughed at and tortured him for doing so. And despite the bitterness, the hate and rage and vitriol that he felt towards this bug that he couldn't squash, Sukuna, in the end, could not help but respect that. And in so doing, he himself is both antithesis and thesis of Jujutsu Kaisen, posing the biggest obstacle and the biggest advocation of the messages it imposes. Many thanks for watching.